What if Nikola Tesla's greatest invention wasn't alternating current, but an idea the world wasn't yet ready for? Imagine a quiet night in a laboratory where the air feels heavy before a storm. At the center is Tesla, surrounded by coils, wires, and bluish sparks. To many, he was a brilliant inventor. To others, a dangerous dreamer. And to those who watched him closely, perhaps he was something more unsettling. A man trying to break free from electricity's chains. Legend has it that Tesla didn't just want to send messages wirelessly. He wanted to send energy. Energy capable of traveling through the earth and air to reach any place with a suitable receiver. If that had worked on a large scale, there would have been no need for thousands of wires or closed networks. An isolated house or a remote community could receive electricity without relying on a physical line. But therein lies the dangerous question. If energy could reach everyone without a controlled grid, who would have the power to measure it, sell it, and stop it? The real part of the story is just as fascinating as the legend. Tesla was indeed a central figure in alternating current technology, and his wireless vision wasn't just an empty fantasy. Wardenclyffe Tower in Shoreham, Long Island, actually existed. It was partly financed by J.P. Morgan and presented as a wireless communication system. But Tesla envisioned something grander, a global system for transmitting information and perhaps energy. The part we must examine carefully is the most mysterious. There is no solid proof that Tesla powered cities wirelessly or created a global grid of free electricity. That belongs to the realm of unconfirmed stories. But the myth stems from a real foundation. Tesla worked with high frequencies, resonance, and highly advanced transmission methods. Simply put, Tesla wasn't a magician. He was a forward-thinking scientist who wanted to know if the Earth and the atmosphere could form a giant natural circuit. What is certain is that he tried. What is unsettling is how far he got. If you like stories where science, power, and mystery collide, subscribe, because this story is just beginning. Wardenclyffe didn't look like an ordinary radio station. From a distance, it appeared as a strange, unreal structure, towering above the ground like the skeleton of a machine from the future. It had an imposing height, a metal dome, and an underground system that fueled rumors for decades. To the average visitor, it might have seemed like an oversized antenna. To Tesla, it was a gateway. He didn't see it as an isolated tower, but as the first point of a planetary network. And here a simple question arises: why would an inventor build something so enormous if he only wanted to send messages? The answer brings us to the heart of his dream. Tesla understood that the modern world would need not only electricity, but also instant communication. He wanted to send signals, voice, images, data, and perhaps energy without relying on physical cables. Today, this seems normal because we live with wireless technology. But at the beginning of the 20th century, talking about a planet connected without wires sounded like talking about another world. J.P. Morgan saw a business opportunity. Tesla saw a transformation of civilization. That difference became a massive divide. For Morgan, Wardenclyffe was meant to be a business. For Tesla, it was meant to be the beginning of a global network. The tower was real, the communication goal was real, and Tesla's ambition was real. What never materialized was the transmission of energy on a global scale. That difference doesn't weaken the story. It makes it more believable. What's extraordinary is that Tesla attempted it when almost no one could imagine anything like it. Wardenclyffe was like trying to build global radio, primitive internet, and wireless power before there were even words to describe it. Simply put, the tower was the symbol of a question ahead of its time. Could humanity connect without relying on physical networks controlled by a select few? Tesla believed so. The financial world wasn't so sure. Tesla's dream was beautiful. Energy for all, communication for all, access to places that traditional infrastructure couldn't easily reach. But every technological marvel has an economic shadow. If a system could send energy to any point without visible wires, how would it be built? How would it be measured? Who would own the route that electricity traveled? For Tesla, these questions seemed secondary to the human benefit. For a financier, they were the heart of the matter. Morgan wasn't an enemy of science. He was a businessman. His support demanded investment, control, and a return. If the project became an open network difficult to control, its commercial value became uncertain. Therein lies the true clash of this story. Not necessarily a perfect conspiracy, but something colder and more commonplace. Two visions of the future that couldn't coexist. Tesla imagined a planet where technology liberated people. The investors envisioned a system that could be managed, sold, and protected. Legend turns this conflict into a secret battle. But even without that layer, the truth remains undeniable. Wardenclyffe lost support because it was expensive, ambitious, and difficult to turn into a secure business. Tesla not only had to prove that his technology worked, he had to prove that he could sustain an industry, and that was an enormous burden. As money dwindled, the dream began to falter. The tower was still there, but each day it seemed less like a promise and more like a warning. Simply put, Tesla wanted to open access. Morgan needed to close the business model. Between these two forces, the tragedy of Wardenclyffe was born. An idea too big to be abandoned, but too uncertain to be financed without fear. Here comes the most unsettling part. Legend says that one night Tesla turned on the tower to an unprecedented power, and for a few minutes, something on Earth seemed to respond. For comments and likes. Before continuing, leave your like and comment honestly. Do you think Tesla was stopped because it failed, or because it came too close to proving something others didn't want to see? According to popular accounts, the night of the supposed experiment had no audience or official announcement. Only silence, darkness, and a tower that seemed to slumber on Long Island. Inside the laboratory, Tesla checked instruments with almost ceremonial precision. It wasn't improvisation, but the gesture of someone who had spent years preparing a question. Legend says that he wasn't testing an ordinary antenna that night. He was trying to make the Earth participate in the experiment as if it were part of the machine. That image is powerful. Tesla at the controls, not trying to master a small electrical current, but to find the planet's hidden rhythm. But we must tread carefully here. There is no reliable historical evidence of a successful secret test at Wardenclyffe that powered buildings miles away or produced a worldwide energy transmission. What we do know is that the idea fits with his actual interests. Tesla investigated resonance, high-frequency currents, and the possibility of sending signals wirelessly. We also know that his electrical experiments could produce visible and impressive effects. That's why the legend survived. Because it didn't appear out of thin air, it was born from a man who truly worked at the limits of what was possible. In the story, the tower begins with a low hum. Then the sound grows. The metal vibrates. The air becomes dry and heavy. Tiny sparks race across surfaces where there was nothing before. The upper dome seems to gather energy, and for an instant, the night around Wardenclyffe ceases to be dark. Although we can't say for sure that it happened this way, the scene explains the feeling surrounding Tesla. He was exploring a territory where documented science and myth intersect. Simply put, this act must feel like a doorway between two worlds. On one side, verifiable history. On the other, the rumor that never died away. The most dramatic part of the story begins when the experiment no longer seems controlled. The tower no longer just hums. It seems to breathe. The gauges move violently. The needles rise and fall as if following a force no one can see. Outside, the sky lights up with white and blue flashes. Inside, the instruments respond in a way that frightens even the man who designed them. That is the central question. What happens when an inventor discovers that his machine works, but isn't sure he can stop it? To understand this, we must explain resonance. Resonance occurs when a system receives energy at the right rhythm and that energy begins to amplify. A swing goes higher when we push it at the exact moment. A glass can shatter if a note matches its natural frequency. Tesla believed that the Earth also had electrical properties that could be harnessed. His goal was to send energy or signals using this natural behavior. In the legend, the danger arises when the resonance becomes too intense, as if the circuit were no longer in the laboratory, but beneath the ground and above the air. This shouldn't be presented as proven fact, but rather as the fear that makes the myth fascinating. Tesla may not have discovered just a useful technology, but a force difficult to control. In a powerful narrative, Tesla doesn't shout or celebrate. He observes. He calculates. He approaches the main control. And when he cuts the power, the silence becomes more terrifying than the previous noise. In simple terms, resonance is energy accumulating at the right rhythm. Tesla wanted to use that principle to connect the world. But if the story were true, the problem wouldn't have been that the system didn't work, but that it worked in a way that was too large and difficult to govern. After the blackout comes the detail that transforms the experiment into a mystery. Tesla and his assistant remain silent. The room still smells of hot metal. There are electrical crackles around the equipment. No one speaks, because sometimes the silence after a discovery weighs more than any applause. Then, looking beyond the fence, a disturbing image appears. Dark, motionless figures, watching from the tree line. They wear no visible insignia. They don't look like neighbors. They are just watching. This scene should not be presented as confirmed truth, but as part of the narrative. However, it symbolizes something real. Electricity, radio, and communication technologies were strategic at the beginning of the 20th century. They were not laboratory toys. They were tools capable of changing businesses, wars, governments, and borders. If someone managed to transmit energy or information in a way that was difficult to control, many powerful people would want to know. We don't need to prove that secret agents were present that night to understand why the idea was sensitive. Tesla was working at a frontier where science could become power. And when science approaches power, it rarely stands alone. In the story, the next day comes warnings, questions, and pressure. It's no longer just research that's discussed, but risk. Wardenclyffe is no longer seen as a curious tower, but as a threat. Simply put, these men may not be proven, but they represent a historical truth. When a technology threatens global control, there's always someone watching. After that supposed night, Tesla's dream didn't explode before the world. There was no celebration, no headlines, no new era of free energy. On the contrary, it began to fade away. For comments and likes, like this post if you're enjoying this story and write in the comments. Was Tesla a misunderstood genius, or an inventor who dreamed beyond what his time could sustain? It wasn't necessary to destroy Wardenclyffe with fire or tear it down violently. It was enough to cut off the money. That's a harsh lesson. Great ideas don't always die because they're false. Sometimes they die because they can't pay for the next day. When financial support began to dwindle, the tower remained standing, but the project began to hollow out from within. Workers left. Materials stopped arriving. Promises became delays, and delays became doubts. For Tesla, every pause was a wound. For investors, every expenditure without a clear result was a red flag. The more conspiratorial version claims that Wardenclyffe was stopped because it worked too well. The more pragmatic version says it failed because it couldn't become a profitable business in time. A credible screenplay must maintain both tensions without blurring them. What is verifiable is that the project faced serious financial problems, that Morgan didn't continue to support it, and that Tesla failed to complete his overall vision. Competition, commercial radio, and the difficulty of explaining his model made Wardenclyffe vulnerable. But the thrill of the story isn't just in the financial loss. It's in the clash between a mind that looked decades ahead and a world that demanded immediate results. Tesla didn't want to sell a mere technical improvement. He wanted to build an invisible infrastructure for humanity. Simply put, Tesla didn't just lose a tower. He lost the bridge between his imagination and industrial reality. Without funding, an idea may live on in notebooks, but it ceases to exist in the world. Over time, the tower began to resemble less a beacon of the future and more a premature ruin. The wood aged. The structures stood still. The laboratory that had been designed to change global communication was filled with silence. It is a sad but powerful image. A place built to transmit energy to the entire planet ended up unable to sustain its own life. Here, it is worth asking a question that will strike the viewer. How many revolutions have died not because they were impossible, but because they arrived before the world could understand them? Wardenclyffe never became the global network that Tesla dreamed of. The tower was eventually dismantled and sold for scrap. But its physical disappearance did not erase the power of the idea. In fact, as the years passed, the world began to resemble, in part, what Tesla imagined. Today, we send information wirelessly. We hear voices from afar. We see images on screens connected by invisible signals. We use radio, mobile phones, Wi-Fi, satellites, and short-range wireless charging. None of this proves that Tesla achieved worldwide free energy, but it does demonstrate that his intuition about a wireless future was ahead of its time. The fall of Wardenclyffe, then, should not be narrated solely as a failure. It should be narrated as a seed that did not germinate in its time, but left a question planted in the human imagination. In simple terms, Tesla did not build the complete system he envisioned. But many current technologies seem like fragments of his dream, small pieces of a vast vision. The story of Wardenclyffe doesn't end with metal sold as scrap. It also ends within Tesla. After the collapse of his grand project, he continued working, writing, imagining, and proposing ideas. But something had changed. The inventor who once filled halls with spectacular demonstrations became increasingly isolated. Fame still surrounded his name, but the confidence of funders was no longer the same. This is where the script needs to quiet down and look at the man, not just the myth. Tesla wasn't a perfect character. Some of his final claims were met with skepticism. Some ideas were difficult to prove. But to reduce him to a madman would be an injustice. Many visionaries seem exaggerated when they describe a future for which the tools don't yet exist. Tesla saw invisible networks before the world lived within them. He saw electricity and communication as forces that could reach far beyond what wires allowed. And yet, he ended up alone with fewer resources, less support, and more questions than answers. This section should illustrate the tragedy of a forward-thinking mind. It's not enough to have a vision. The world must also have the capacity, the money, and the will to pursue it. In legend, Tesla falls silent because he knows he came too close to something forbidden. In documented history, he becomes a tragic figure because his ambitions outgrew the structures that could fund them. Simply put, Tesla wasn't defeated by enemies alone, nor by mistakes alone. He was defeated by the sheer magnitude of his own dream. In January 1943, Tesla died in a room at the New Yorker Hotel. The scene has a quiet sadness. A man who had helped imagine the modern electrical world ended up alone, surrounded by trunks, papers, notes, and mementos of a life dedicated to pursuing the invisible. But after his death, the story was reignited. Officials arrived, his belongings were examined, and his documents were handed over to the authorities. Herein lies one of the most persistent questions. If Tesla was already an old man without money or industrial power, why did his papers still matter so much? The real answer has several layers. After his death, the Office of Alien Property took possession of his papers and belongings in a context marked by World War II. Although Tesla had been a naturalized U.S. citizen for decades, his archives sparked interest because they contained technical ideas, correspondence, and potential concepts related to energy and defense. Among these ideas was Teleforce, presented by the press as a death ray, although Tesla described it more as a defensive technology. We don't know if there was a finished machine there capable of changing the course of warfare. But we do know that in 1943, any document related to energy, lightning, particles, or defense could attract official attention. Legend transforms that moment into a seizure of impossible secrets. The historical explanation is less dramatic but intriguing. Tesla died during a world war, and his archives belong to a man who had spent his life thinking about advanced technologies. Simply put, the mystery of his papers doesn't, in itself, prove a global conspiracy. But it does demonstrate that his ideas, even at the end of his life, were still considered important enough not to be left unexamined. When a genius dies leaving unanswered questions, the story doesn't end. It becomes legend. That's exactly what happened with Tesla. His documents, his unfinished experiments, his pronouncements on wireless power, and his defensive ideas became intertwined with rumors of silent assistance, lost tapes, strange signals, and missing notebooks. Some versions claim that someone close to him revealed what happened at Wardenclyffe before his death. Others speak of recordings of interference, electromagnetic pulses, and phenomena that supposedly continued underground long after the tower went dark. But the script must be honest here. Many of these claims are not well documented in reliable sources. There is no solid proof of an authentic tape confirming the secret experiment, nor is there accepted evidence of a permanent Earth resonance caused by Wardenclyffe. Even so, the myth cannot simply be dismissed as nonsense because it feeds on real facts. Tesla did build an extraordinary tower, he did dream of wireless transmission, he did lose financial backing, he did die leaving behind technical documents, and he did receive attention from authorities after his death. The legend survives because it resonates emotionally with Tesla's life. It seems believable not because every detail is proven, but because the real person was significant enough to warrant enormous questions. Simply put, not everything said about Tesla is true, but almost everything stems from one powerful truth. He was a man who worked so close to the future that we still struggle to separate his possibilities from the myths surrounding him. Let's return one last time to the image of Wardenclyffe at night. A solitary tower, the air heavy with smoke, an inventor at his instruments. Outside, the world sleeps, unaware that perhaps, within that laboratory, a question capable of changing everything is being formulated. What if Wardenclyffe wasn't just a financial failure? What if it was a door that closed prematurely? The most responsible answer is clear. There isn't enough evidence to claim that Tesla built a secret network of unlimited energy, nor that he managed to power the planet using Earth's resonance. But neither can we deny the magnitude of what he attempted. His project was real. His ambition was real. His influence was real. And the fact that many modern technologies operate wirelessly makes his vision seem less strange with each generation. Perhaps Tesla's true secret wasn't a hidden machine or a lost document. Perhaps it was a simple and dangerous idea. Energy, information, and knowledge shouldn't be limited solely by those who control the wires, the meters, and the permits. That idea still makes people uncomfortable because it touches on a relevant question. Should technology liberate people or concentrate more power in the hands of a few? Tesla doesn't need a fabricated legend to be fascinating. The truth is enough. He was a man who looked at a world full of poles and wires and dared to imagine one connected by invisible forces. We don't know if that secret night happened as the stories say, but we do know one thing. Tesla saw a wireless future when most people were only just beginning to understand electricity. And that's why, even when the tower fell, the question remained. Now tell me in the comments, do you think Tesla was stopped by those in power, or did he simply arrive before the world was ready? If you want more stories where science, mystery, and history blend with real events, subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for the next documentary.